So welcome back to the Virtual Azure Community Day. Our next speaker is live here in the studio. Hi Albert-Jan, how are you?
I'm doing fine, how are you?
I'm fine as well. Great.
Long day so far, I guess.
Yes, a very long day. For some longer than for others, but it is a long day.
I have an easy day. I actually managed to watch some sessions this morning, so that was good.
That's good.
Yeah, came over like 30 minutes ago, so relaxed day for me.
Oh, great. Good to hear. So you're really ready for your presentation?
Yes, I'm really ready.
Okay. So I know you as one of the big SharePoint community members, but you're taking a bit different subject right now, right?
Yes, it's actually interesting to see that with everything in Office 365 moving more and more to the open source side of things. With SharePoint Framework you can do React, things like that. We actually see that it's no longer just SharePoint development anymore, it's becoming more and more, let's say, Azure developer. So we've been looking to some of the services in Azure, and one of them is actually what I'm going to talk about, static sites. Yeah. And I've been running my blog for ages on WordPress, and I decided to migrate to static sites, I think 6 or 7 months ago, and I started experimenting with the real serverless things, and that's where I actually got hooked on all the cool stuff you can do with it.
Okay. So how does that relate to search engine optimization and that sort of things that are way sophisticated in WordPress out of the box?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of how you want to approach that, right? If you look at how Google or Bing actually look at your site, they actually focus on performance. So the faster it responds, the better hits you can actually make, the better score you get, so to say. So if you build your HTML properly, you can actually achieve really, really fast results. So,
I get a notice that your microphone is off.
Let's see if we can do something about that. This better?
Yes.
Good. So when you talk about search engine optimization, it actually has to do with what you put in your HTML and how fast you can serve it. So if you're on a static site, you probably get a better hit from Google or Bing because you're faster. The only downside is you actually have to manage your own HTML, but then again, that's not really hard.
Okay, interesting. I will think about that for my personal blog.
So for my blog, I actually looked at the Google Page Speed Index, something that actually give you a ranking. Yeah. And with WordPress, I had like 40 points out of 100. And with a static site, I managed to get 99 on mobile and 100 on the desktop. So obviously, that's way better than WordPress itself.
Yeah, quite convincing.
I think I know what I'm going to do next weekend.
It's not that hard. There are plugins that actually help you to get out your content, because if you're using a static site, you want to probably run a static site generator. I'm using Hugo, but there are quite a few actually. And what they do is they allow you to write your blog posts in Markdown or any format that you like, and then parse that to HTML. So you can really focus on your content and get the HTML done once. After that, you're good to go.
Okay, sounds great.
Really, really easy.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah. And we all love Markdown, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, you get used to it.
Okay. Awesome. So are you ready?
I'm ready, definitely.
Okay. Now let's get started.
Let's get started. Cool.
Good luck.
Thanks.
We should have some tune, right? When they walk to the other side of the studio.
For next time.
Next time, yes.
So there we go. Running static sites on Azure. So there we go, running static sites on Azure. The tagline, scalable front ends on, any service. It doesn't really matter where you're running on Azure. You can use different providers as well as you want, but let's start with the Azure part of things. So first of all, what is a static website? A static web is a web page that is delivered to the web browser exactly as it is stored. In contrast to dynamic web pages, so if you look at WordPress, what actually happens if you hit WordPress, the server will actually figure out what do I need to serve to a user. It will go to a database, it will pick up the content, and it will try to get all the content that you need and then serve that to your users, where a static web page is just hitting an endpoint and it will instantly return you the HTML that you requested, and there is no magic in between. So there's no web application, it's just running static files. And if you look at the use case, so why do you want to do that? Why do you need it? There are a few reasons why you can actually have a look at static sites. So the first one is speed. If you're using static sites, if you're building static sites, you will see that it's always the fastest option that you have available. So in contrast to any CMS, running a static site serving static content is always going to be the fastest option available. And with that, you can do even more, you can tweak it even more if you want, but keep in mind it's the fastest option that you will have. Second, because there is no backend, there is no server that can be hijacked, it's way more secure. You only surface content that a user is allowed to see, but there is no way a user can hijack or inject SQL or can try to hijack anything on your page. It's always going to be the most secure option available for you. It also is probably the most simple solution. While it might require some developer experience because you have to write either HTML or you have to write Markdown, there are some things that you need to take into account there. But if you look at it, once you know what you'll need to do, create HTML pages, once you have a flow for that, it is fairly simple to generate new content or work with the content that you want to surface. Then it has a sort of developer experience. So I'm writing my blog as a static site and I use a static site generator for that. So I write my blogs in Markdown. I can do that from Visual Studio Code and I can commit my code and then poof, it's going to be live on my website. Fairly easy. There are some CMS providers out there as well. So there are solutions if you're not comfortable writing Markdown, if you want to have the, what you see is what you get experience. There are options for that as well, but it's, fairly easy to write content. So let's start with what do you need to surface if you're building a website. It's probably going to be HTML, JavaScript, and some CSS. That's the static site, that's the static site's content. That's all there is. So it's only going to be HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Maybe some images if you want to show images, they are available as well, but the focus is on that static content. And if you think about that, you can write that HTML yourself, you can write that JavaScript yourself, and that's all good, that's all fine, there's no problem with that. We do have a short demo on that, but what you can also do is you can also have a look at a static site generator. And if you look at a static site generator, what it actually does for you is that takes away some of the burden of writing HTML. So a static site generator just uses a sort of templating structure. So you would have two parts. You would have a piece of content, you would have a piece of template, and then with that static site generator, what actually will be done is it will pick that up, it will merge the content and the template, so to say, and it will bring that both together and making sure that you get a website. So if you look out there, there are several options. You've got Hugo, you've got Jekyll, and what they all do, they all get that content and merge that with your template and get your content out there. So if you start thinking about that, what you will actually get, your content will most likely be a Markdown file because that's all the rage nowadays, and that template just will be an HTML template. And if you look at the sample on the screen, you will see that even in a Markdown file, you can have some metadata, so you can have a title, you can have a date, you can have a URL or a slug specified, all kinds of options and metadata that you can specify. You can specify your content, and obviously within that HTML you can reference that content. And what happens is that as that static site generator passes by your content, it will generate the HTML on the fly for you. So if you think about that, that static site generator can actually help you to generate that HTML and push that HTML to the location where you want to surface it. So it makes life a bit easier to use a static site generator, but it's not required. So if you don't want to use it, you're fair to use your own HTML. And once you have that HTML, once you have your website, there are actually a few different options that you can use to host your content in Azure, so to say. So there are 3 main options that you can use. You can use the static app service, you can use a normal app service, and you can use blob storage. Now, the static app service is currently in preview, and that's a dedicated app service option where you can host your static site. The cool thing about a static app service is that it doesn't use a normal runtime. So if you use an app service, you will always have a runtime, and you do have some more control over authentication, but it brings more to your load, because if you have a runtime, you might want to, or you probably need to configure things around that as well. Well, a static app service is just what it says. It can only host HTML files. And then you also have the blob storage option. Within the blob storage option, you have way more options to configure. It's probably the fastest option currently available, so you can get the best response times by using blob storage, but it also requires the most configuration. Now, some remarks per option. If you look at the static app service, that's currently in preview. So it has been announced at build. It's really awesome, but it's still in preview. So if you're looking at a production ready scenario, you might want to, not use static apps per se in your production scenario. It's working fine, but still preview. Now, the second thing is that currently the static app service only links to GitHub. So you will need to have your code, your content, actually running in GitHub. If you're not comfortable putting your content in GitHub, then you have either to wait, because they did announce that they are supporting Azure DevOps in the near future, but currently it's only GitHub. So you do need to set up that connection to GitHub, so you'll need to be the owner of the organization in order to actually do that. And well, once you've done that, you can configure, you can deploy anything. What will actually happen that on each commit, it will push your content to that static app service. It will bring it live. You also have some other options like backend routing rules. You can do some things with permissions, but we'll have a look at that in a second. The second option, the app service itself, is basically a normal app service where you can do anything you like. So you would have way more control over your app service. A static app service doesn't provide you that much control over the configuration, but as stated, it always requires a runtime. So if you use the EZ commands to actually create the content that you need to create or create the resources that you need to create, you can pass the flag HTML. What that will do is it will create a new static web app, or it creates a new app service, but as you can see, it requires a runtime, so it uses the Windows app runtime, whether a static app and the blob account doesn't require a runtime. So it only provides you with some additional config, makes some things easier, other things a bit harder. Then finally, you do have blob storage, and basically it has the best performance so far. It does require some more configuration, because if you're looking at blob storage, you'll probably end up doing blob storage, CDN, and a custom endpoint, so you can actually host your custom domain on there. That will definitely be the best experience, but it does require some configuration. Cool thing about blob storage is that there is no runtime, and because it's just blob storage, it's really, really freaking cheap, because I'm running my blog and I do have some content, not much, but my whole blog hosting and everything costs me less than $1 a month just to run all my content, and it doesn't really matter how much visitors you actually have, because like the first gazillion users are free. If you're using CDN, you get quite a bunch of performance for free using the blob storage option. So that's really, really cool. Now, if you're not happy with the things that are in Azure, you do have other options as well. You can use Netlify, you can use GitHub Pages, GitLab Pages, Heroku. So Amazon AWS provides it as well. So blob storage, so to say, or static app hosting is really easy. It's, let's say, a common use case, so to say, if you want to work with static sites. Now, let's start with a static app. Let's minimize my browser or minimize my presentation. And I did create a resource group. Now what I can do in that resource group, I can create a new resource and I can search for static site. what you will see is that there is a new option available for me, the static web app, and I can create one. It's fairly easy. All you need to do is you'll need to provide a subscription and a resource group. You can give it a name. So let's do virtual Azure Day 01. You can specify a region. So let's do West Europe because I'm there. And what I then need to do is I'll need to log in with GitHub. And what this actually does is this logs me in within GitHub. I'm already logged in, so I don't need to specify my username. You then need to specify your organization. You'll have to specify your repository, and it will just go through everything, find the repository for you, and then you'll need to specify the branch that you want to look at. Now, what this actually does is this will go to GitHub, it will set up some things for me, and then generate everything in Azure. So it takes around, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes to actually generate everything. And as you can see, it's already linked to a different repository. So what happens if you create something new, it will fail if it's already being used. So it will figure out that there is something already running, and then we'll just tell you, sorry, you can't create it. You can go back to my resource group, and you can see that I already created a static app demo site. Now, if that has been created, if everything went well, you can see that that static app web preview is there. Then you can see that it's linked to the master repository, that it has GitHub Actions hooked up to it, that there is a workflow file created. So basically, this is all the stuff that gets created. Now, if I go to my site, what I actually see is that I just created some HTML, and what I can then do is I can add some new HTML, let's add some more demo content. I can save this. What I can do is I can push this to my to my repo. I didn't do any pull requests, didn't do anything special. I just added a line of text and added some demo content. And as soon as I push this to my repository, what will actually happen is that those GitHub actions automatically gets triggered. So those are provided as soon as I created that static web app. And now if I go to my GitHub, what you will see is if I go to my GitHub actions, that it picked up, it figured out that I added some demo content, and that it created 2 jobs. What it will actually do is build and deploy and close a request. So this takes, let's say, 30, maybe 60 seconds to actually generate everything. Keep in mind that I haven't done anything, I haven't written any code other than just added some HTML content to my site. Now, once this is run, what actually happens is that if I go back, you can go to this URL and you will see some content here. So now I only still have the Azure virtual day, but within 30 seconds it should show my content. Now we can wait for that, but we'll just move on because, well, you can imagine this is probably fairly easy. Now, if you go into the configuration options that you will have, you can see that there are some other interesting things as well. So that deployment history, those GitHub actions, actually gets created automatically. So I don't have any experience with creating GitHub actions. I haven't done anything with them so far, but what actually happens is it creates the YAML file for me. No specific things that I need to do. Now, if I go to my content, what you will see is that what it did is it created a hidden folder, which is .github/workflows. And if you go there, you can see all the actions that gets created or get added for me without anything I need to do. So I can change this if I want. I can add or change actions. I can tweak it, so to say, but you're not required to. So really quick, if you look at this YAML file, it looks at the master branch, it looks at pull requests, and it had a few jobs. There is a build and deploy job, and as you can see within the steps, what it does is it uses the static web apps deploy preview action, and that actually creates or deploys everything for me. Now, let's have a quick look. There we go. So it added my demo content. This is the basics that you'll need to do to set up your first static web app. So there's no fancy things there. It's all out-of-the-box functionality, just clicking in your browser, next, finish, and sync your repository, and you're good to go. Now, because it's a static web app, you do have some options as well. So let's have a quick look at the configuration. First of all, within the configuration, you do have the option to create application settings. And as you can see, if you want to create application settings, you'll need to have a Azure function added to it. If you don't have a function, you do not have configuration settings. You don't need configuration settings if you don't have a function. Second, you do have custom domains. So you can specify, you can add your own domain. Now, by default, it's running on a Azure staticapps.net website URL. So if you want to create your own blog, you probably want to have a fancy domain name, you can add those as well. Not really, not really complex there. It explains what you'll need to do. You'll need to configure a record with a DNS provider. You'll have to set the name, you'll set the type to CNAME, and you'll need to set the value. If you do that, then you're all good. Now, what you can also do is you can add functions, and functions are added through code. So I don't have a UI to actually add functions, but what you can do, and there is this nice description, add an API to an Azure Static Web App. And if you look at that, all you need to do is you'll need to have a API folder with the content in there. So there is this nice sample out there that you can use to add a Azure function in your static web app if you want to. But you're not required. You can call Azure functions anywhere in your environment. They don't need to be in your static web app, but they can be. Now, the other one is that there is this really fancy thing about staging environments. What you automatically get is if you create a new pull request, then a new staging environment is fired up. So as soon as in your GitHub repo you create a new pull request, it automatically creates a new staging environment. So let's open fork. Let's create a new branch and let's create a pull request. So here I did create anything. Let's do a create new branch. Let's do demo. Let's change some, or let's track demo. Let's change some content in my demo pipeline. So, oops, wrong one. Let's go to this one. Let's change some more. Let's add another span pull request. Let's do feature edit pull request sample. Let's push that to my GitHub. And what I now have is a new demo branch. And if I go to my GitHub page, I go to my GitHub repo, what I can actually do is I can create a new pull request. And I can say, let's do a pull request. Let's do demo into branch, create a pull request. And what you will see is that it will automatically create it. Now, if I go here, it takes roughly a few minutes to actually pick that up. Let's see. Still not there, we're not going to wait for it. But what it will do is it will create a new environment for me, a different URL, so to say, that will automatically bring up a staging environment where you can look, where you can have a view at the change you're trying to do to see if it is bringing you what you're looking for. So you can actually validate the output of the change you're doing without having to set up anything. So everything is out there by default. Then what you can also do is you can invite additional people to your site, and here you can see you can create an invitation link, and that invitation link allows you to invite a specific user where that user get access to the domain where you're running everything. Now, what is cool about this part is that you can invite people to visit your environment. The downside is that you currently can only invite 25 people and you have to invite users by email address. So you cannot say, I want to invite everyone within my Azure Active Directory, or I want to invite a dynamic group, so to say. So that's things that are not really there yet, but well, perhaps in the future you do have some more flexibility around that. So that's running a static site. That means that with that static web app, I do have HTML running and everything is there. So what I can also do is I can also look at the storage account option. I do have some more options there. So let's have a quick look. Let's check it one more time to see if my staging environment is already there. Yep, there it goes. So that staging environment did get picked up. It figured out that there is a pull request and I can use the browse to see. And here you can see that it added the pull request, and what you can also see is that it has a slightly different URL. It added a -1 compared to the default one. So as you can see, any pull request automatically spins up a new environment for you without you having to specify anything for it. So that's all things that you get out of the box if you're using the static app preview, which is really awesome. Now, let's say that you want to do something different. Let's say you want to run your weblog and you want to hit a specific threshold on the Google page speed index. Let's say you want to have full control over the most of the things that you can come up with. Now, what you can do is you can go to your storage account and you can create anything there. So let me go back. Let me go to my weblog and let's show you what I did in my weblog. What I did is I created a storage account, and within that storage account you do have some control over the things that you want to do, and one of the things that you want to do is you want to switch on the static site. So if you switch on the static site, something that's flipped off, disabled by default, but as soon as you do that, you get a primary endpoint, which is your blob domain where everything is hosted. You get a index document name, you can specify an error document path, and as you can see, it creates a $web container for your static site. And if you go there, what you'll see is that in that container, I just uploaded a bunch of HTML files. So that's all HTML content and that's running my weblog. So this static site, this endpoint, will be running my website. And as you can see, if I go there, you see my blog. Now, this isn't really a fancy domain, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to specify my own domain as well. I wanted to add my own domain. So what I did is if I go down here, what you can see is I can go to custom domain. I didn't add a custom domain to my Blob Storage. I don't need it there. What I did is I specified a CDN, a content delivery network. Now, if you go there, what you can see is that we specified a content delivery network where if you specify the CDN, you actually get a Azure Edge domain, and you can go there and within that Azure Edge domain, you can specify some configuration. And one of the things that I did is I added my custom domain and I automatically added a certificate, so making sure that it's running HTTPS. And here you can see that if I use that URL, that, well, you can configure HTTPS by default. And as you can see, recently they changed the TLS version. You can actually change it now. I didn't flip it off. I just didn't save anything, so I'm going to ignore it. Don't need it. Probably will be turned on at some point in time, but not for now. And what you can do here is you can configure all the configuration that you'll need. So you can specify anything you like. And if you go to your endpoint, you do have some additional options there as well. You can do things with your caching rules. So you can specify whether caching should be applied or not. I did the ignore query strings parameter. You can do things like optimization, where you can configure on your endpoint what you want to optimize for. General web delivery is the default one. You can change the rules engine, so you can add custom rules if you want. And I only have one rule, and I just added a always cache expiration. So if there's no cache expiration set on any content that's coming through the CDN, I'll just add at least 1 year of caching. So if I'm using images or HTML that is missing my cache policy, it will be automatically applied. Now, as you can imagine, if I go to my blog, you will see some content there, and that's all HTML. Now, you can imagine that I don't want to specify all that HTML myself. I don't want to think about that HTML. So what did I do? I created a structure in Markdown. I used Hugo to actually generate the HTML. But the cool thing is that I did also use a pipeline, a release pipeline, to do all the things that I need to do. So if I go to my blog, what you will see is, let's say I got an about Markdown page with some metadata on it, I've got some content, and as soon as I run my build, this will automatically generate the HTML for me on the fly, push everything to where I want it to be, and have all the things in place. So what I did is I created a YAML pipeline, which looks pretty much similar to the GitHub Actions pipeline that we had, slightly different, but the gist is the same. So the first thing that I'll need to do is I'll need to build my code base, and then I'll need to deploy my code base. So building, I call it my build template. And if you look at my build template, there's just a bunch of steps. And if you look what needs to be done, I actually need to get the Hugo engine, because if I don't have the Hugo engine, I cannot compile the HTML for me. Then I'll need to install that Hugo within the context where I'm running. So I'm running in a Ubuntu image where I want to have Hugo available. Then as soon as I have Hugo available, I actually want to execute it. So here you can see that I call the Hugo, the Hugo executable, make sure that it runs. And once Hugo is executed, what I can then do is I can deploy all the things, make sure that it combines all the files, update all the things to my Azure website. Finally, what I then want to do is I want to copy everything to a folder where I can use it. I want to zip that folder so I can later reuse it. And I also publish that Hugo installer, so if I want to run it multiple times, then it don't need to download it every time. It will still be present in my release pipeline. Now if I go to my deploy template, you'll see that it's pretty much the same, only with different steps. So what it will do is it will download Hugo again, make sure that it is available, it installs Hugo, it extracts the zip file, it executes the Hugo deploy again, but this time making sure that it is deployed to my Blob Storage. And finally, what I'll need to do, and that's a remark that I forgot the first time, I'll actually have to make sure that the CDN is purged, because if you don't do that, the CDN will hold the old version of your HTML, and you will be refreshing your page like crazy, wondering why your blog hadn't updated, why there are no changes, because, well, they're still stuck on the CDN and you're still looking at an old version. Now, with that, that's all you need to do to deploy anything with Hugo. Now, if you're using Jekyll, you'll probably have pretty much the same experience, pretty much the same way of working with things, because, well, it's just a different engine. So you would still have your content structure, you would still have a release pipeline that deploys everything for you. So as soon as you change anything, just make sure that your release pipeline picks up your changes and starts working with it. Now, that's the basics when you talk about running a static web app. So it's just serving HTML. And then the second thing that you want to think about is actually authentication. So let's assume that you want to do things with authentication and you want to make sure that your web app is secure. Now, if you're running a app service, so not a static app service or not a blob storage, but a real app service, there is this really nice checkbox saying anyone who accesses this app service has to have a valid token. He has to be logged in. Now, you can do that, but then again, you can do the same if you're running blob or if you're running a static app service. What you'll need to do is you'll need to implement the OAuth implicit flow. And if you have the OAuth implicit flow enabled, you can do the authentication part. And what OAuth implicit flow does for you, it just makes sure that if you go to a route, it will make sure that you do have the appropriate tokens, the appropriate cookies. It might do redirection if you want, but, well, OAuth implicit flow is nothing new there. What you can also do is you can do some more complex things. You can actually do the on behalf flow. And what you can do with the on behalf flow is you can call your APIs. So you can call any API you develop and generate a new token in there. So let's say for our concept, we want to call the graph. Calling the graph is an API from Microsoft. And you can get anything from there if you do have OAuth implicit flow enabled, because you do have a token that is allowed to go to the graph. But what if you have your own custom API where you want to do authentication as well? Or maybe you want to call the graph from within your custom API. In that case, what you will need to do is you will need to do the OAuth implicit flow, including a on behalf flow. And if you do a implicit flow, you can call your web API. That's fairly easy. So web API A is just OAuth implicit flow. But then if you do have a token for web API A, you can tell your token endpoint that you also want to do things on web API B. And that means that you can do the on behalf flow and you can walk through that to see and get content and run, well, content on behalf of a user in the backend of your service. And that's where you can do long running operations. You can call the graph from within functions, or you can do things that you do not want to process in the front end, which makes sense as well, I guess. So let's do a really quick demo on that as well. Now, what I have here is I do have a well, default template, so to say, a sample, and whoops, let me do yarn start to start everything. This is just a React default sample. So if you go to the documentation site, what you will find is that this will render for you a sample explaining all the things that you'll need to do to start working with React. Now I'm going to open it in a different browser to make sure that it is working, that I'm logged in correctly. It's going to take 2 or 3 seconds to actually starting. It's still saying starting the development server. But what this will do is it will show me the default React sample. Let me say compiled with warnings. Okay, I can live with warnings. Here you can see React graph tutorial. Nothing new there, nothing changed. What I can do is I can sign in. I can use my account, I can log in. And for some reason I do have a invalid ID token. That should be, that's not what I expected it to be. Let me try again. The demo gods are not working with me. Yeah, I'm not going to debug an access token here. Now, believe me, this should be working. Let me go back to my code, just walk you through what actually needs to happen. So if you want to do the on behalf of things, what you probably want to do is you probably want to call an Azure function and you want to authenticate against that Azure function. By default, if you want to authenticate against an Azure function, you can specify either a key, you can specify a function key, and then anyone with that function key can call your function. But what you probably want to do is you want to make sure that that function only is accessible by users who are known in your Active Directory. So what you'll need to do is, here you can see that I have a Azure function component where that Azure function actually calls my Azure function. So I have this function running. If I would run this function and I will try that in my browser, it will take a second to load, then it will say, hey, page cannot be displayed. I'll just, well, as you can see, it's trying to do an auth callback, so it's trying to authenticate for me, and if it's not working properly, then it fails. So I need to authenticate against this Azure function. Now, what you will need to do in order to get that working, let me go to my, there we go. You will actually have to have 2 applications, so 2 Active Directory application registrations. The first one is your sample. So here I do have a React graph tutorial. Within that React graph tutorial, what I did specify, if it loads, 1, 2, 3. I specified a application ID. I'll make sure that there are redirect URLs where I do have some web URLs. I have a public client. I made it a name, so all's good there. And then you can do some configuration. Here you can specify branding if you need to, but what I did is I made sure that there are some redirect URLs, mobile and desktop applications if needed, and I specified the implicit grant. So this implicit grant allows me to authenticate this specific application. Now, this React Graph tutorial is actually looking at a temp application where the temp application says, okay, I want to expose this specific application. I want to make sure that it is available for different users as well. So this endpoint can be used in code, here you can see, and I can specify that. That means that the React Graph application registration is actually able to call the temp application that I'm using. And that temp application is actually what my Azure functions are running against. So if I go to my Azure functions and I go to the configuration, here you can see that I've got some HTTP triggers, and within my HTTP trigger, what I did in my code, takes a second to load as well. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So what I did is I made sure that I can log whether I'm logged in or not. So what you do get if you're logged in, you always get a principal ID. But what I also do is I log the passed token, because the passed token is added as a authorization header. And what you can then do is you can change the token. You can say, okay, I did get a passed token, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that that token can be used to different results as well. So here you can see I do get a JSON token. I deserialize that from the get correct token. So if I go there, if I go to my get correct token, what I actually need to do is I'll need to replace the bearer part of it. Then I do have an assertion token, and with that assertion token, I can request a new token. You can actually request anything you like. What you need to do for that is you actually have to specify that you're doing a on behalf flow. So what I want to do is I want to do the request token use on behalf of. I want to do that for my graph, and I have to specify the scope. So in this case, I want to do the user read, meaning that my function, as soon as I get a token, it can then use a new token to actually go to the graph and execute queries against the graph in order to get user profile properties, meaning that this specific function can now do user read as soon as it is being called from that specific user. So that means that I can go to my website, I can call an Azure function, and that function then can do things against the graph, or can go to SQL, get things in SQL that I do have permissions on. For instance, if you have row level security, you can just say, give me all the rows that this user token has permissions for to actually see. Makes sense to think about that as well, because then you would have a truly serverless site running with all your content, running with everything in Azure Functions. Now, a few remarks, things to take into consideration before we wrap things up. First of all, static sites are great for performance. So if you're looking to a high performance site, making sure that everything is within milliseconds of your end users, definitely have a look at it. Authentication can be done as well, but does require some work. Depending on your use cases, you actually have to do some things yourself, and you have to be aware of those things. The on behalf flow is doable, but there are some, let's say, caveats to be aware of, some things that might be a bit harder if you're doing it for the first time. If you're playing around with CDN, it's really awesome, it's really quick. However, be aware that some policies that you have in place will take up 24 hours if you apply them before content is actually removed. So the first time that I started playing with everything, I deployed my blog, I didn't purge my CDN, and I was waiting, hey, where is my blog post coming? It's not there. Everything is working correctly, my release pipeline is deploying everything, but for some reason I didn't purge the CDN, everything was there. Well, that means that you still have to clean up, so to say, before you can move on. Think about cache policies, because by default cache policies are not applied to all the content in your blob storage. So if you have webby images, WebP images, if you have PNG images, JPEG images, some of them will not pick up a cache policy. So if you start testing your content, you will probably see that some content has no cache headers. Create them yourself and you will have a better performance. And if you want to see how your site is doing, definitely check out the Google PageSpeed Insights, because that will, well, give you some insights in what's actually happening. With that, if you do have questions, feel free to email me or reach out on Twitter or GitHub, and I will try to get to you as soon as possible. Questions?
Yes, thank you very much, and come over and take place. Thank you very much for the session. Like, this is. Well, I think it's quite powerful. I just moved my homepage a few months back. I moved them to GitHub pages.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm totally excited to check this out, because like what I like is what you mentioned before, is the extensibility and all the other services you can use. So what is your next project you're thinking of? Because I know, like, having a website and having functionality that always invites you to like push things further. So what's next?
Yeah, so one of the things we do internally now is actually writing documentation as code. So we try to write our documentation in Markdown and generate a website based on the Markdown. And you can actually do some really interesting things with that as well, right? If you have a product or a large project, you do have quite some content. What you can actually do is you can generate that website, but use Azure Search to index all the content for you. And because it's HTML, you can do things like print to PDF as well. So on the one side, you have a really nice way of showing documentation instead of using Word, which, well, as a developer, I don't really like Word. I rather write my Markdown, then make it look pretty for a client. So you can just say, here you go, there's your content. And then use things like Azure Search to allow them to actually index content. And you can go even further and apply AI to automatically tag content with, or tag your content with keywords, or, well, all the cool stuff you can do with that.
I don't know about the people at home or whatever, wherever they are looking from, watching from, but I hear like a SharePoint like guru talking about Markdown and like all these cool features, and I think that's like really cool, and it shows how powerful this technology can be, like with, for instance, indeed Azure Search.
So if you think about it, if you look at docs.microsoft, they have this whole flow where you actually can go to a page and you can say, hey, I want to change this page, or I see a typo. You have this tiny button saying edit. What it will do is it will do the all the technical stuff for you, and you'll just go right away into edit that page. And as soon as you click on save, it will automatically create a pull request. And that whole flow can be done with this as well, right? You can just create your content, add a button that points to the correct repository. You can have a policy on that repository. Just as soon as you click on edit, it will automatically create a new branch for you, and it will do the pull request part. That's, that was really eye-opening for me. I mean, like you said, I'm a SharePoint developer, and like really way back I was writing C#, and well, that's fun as well. But nowadays it's all well, more open source, and that's really cool. So you can use tools that are being used in the real world, not only with Microsoft, but like I can explain to friends what I'm doing now, instead of I'm building stuff with C#, which is complex to explain.
Yeah, because people totally are like, okay, that's a whole nother world actually. Yeah, okay, that's cool. So what you're like also saying, that it's easier to find like more people sharing the same interest, finding help more easy.
So we are all developers, right?
Yeah.
And I don't when I started out, there were a few people blogging about SharePoint because it was hard to get into and you had to buy a decent license to actually run SharePoint on your environment. You had a pretty expensive laptop. Nowadays, with stuff like this, I can just press a button and I get a free plan. I can try it. Maybe it takes like $1 or $2, but like I said, running my blog is 12 cents a month, which I don't have many visitors, but still 12 cents a month. When I was running WordPress, I spent at least $10 just to run WordPress. So it's really easy to start, and it doesn't really matter. Like everyone knows HTML and everyone understands the basic concepts that you can apply. So I can talk with pretty much anyone about what I'm trying to achieve with my static site, and you can get input from friends that are doing completely different things, but might focus on optimizing JavaScript, or might focus on infrastructure, or might optimize other things. So yeah, it's really easy to start playing around with it, and that's really cool.
Awesome. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people watching right now and thinking, okay, now I know what to do during this staycation.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about moving my blog, and I was like, okay, this is probably really complex, and I have to admit that maybe I overcomplicated a few things when I was building it, but the basics is just get a plugin that translates your WordPress sites to Markdown files, and the plugin is there. It's just install, export, and then maybe you'll need to find some regular expressions to clean up some content if you have like a really old WordPress install. But after that, you're done, and you can generate everything for you. And I think building a release pipeline might take you another 2 or 3 hours, but that's it. Once it's in place, then you're done.
Yeah, and there's excellent tutorials on achieving just that.
Yeah.
So, and this is a good thing because it's, like you mentioned, very easy to start, of course.
Yeah.
But also when you think a little bit longer about it and you learn how it works, then you also know how you can apply this to a business to solve a business problem, which is, of course, very cool.
Yeah.
For 12 cents a month. So
yeah, that's
awesome.
It's better than running a €100 a month app service plan for, documentation. Now you can just say, okay, it's 12 cents or maybe 40 cents if you want to have some more content, but that's basically it.
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat from Kevin. Do you have any recommendations, English is hard, regarding using SharePoint as a CMS for building a static website versus Markdown?
Oh yeah, actually an interesting question, using SharePoint as a CMS. You could probably do that. There are two things that you need to take into account. The first one is you'll need to have a hook in place to get content from SharePoint at some point in time. So you can use webhooks to trigger on any change, or you can have a process running every hour or every night to extract the content that you need. The thing is, with SharePoint you can do like proper design, so you can change the way things look, add images, you can add purple text, you can add web arts. That are things that are not known in a static web app. So you can extract some of the content. If it's just plain text, you can extract some of the HTML. If it's like the H1, H2, make it bold, make it italic, that's things you can fairly easily extract. But web arts, that's going to be hard. So if you want to start, I would say start with news pages, explain to your users that they shouldn't use any web arts, just sections, and then, writing a function or writing a webhook isn't really that complex. I mean, there is the graph where you can just say, give me a page. You have SharePoint REST API where you can just say, give me the content of a page. And yeah, then it's just REST calls, making sure that you have the proper content. So I'm just not sure if I should if I would do it. I mean, I get that the CMS part might be easy, but Markdown isn't really that hard, and Markdown can be stored in SharePoint as well. So maybe it's easier just to put your Markdown files in SharePoint and point to that location and say any change on the Markdown files will trigger a new release for your site or for your content site.
Yeah, sounds like a good solution as well, and maybe a bit easier.
A bit easier to start with.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thank you very much for your interesting talk on static websites.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and there is, if you like this topic on static websites and all other things front end, then I have a great recommendation for you for an event which will happen tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. So that will be around 6:30 CET. Yeah. And this is Create Frontend, where we will have a lot of topics on front end with names like Jan Looper, John Papa, Burke Holland, Debbie O'Brien, Chris North. I'm gonna stop because I'm bound to forget somebody, and then whoa, that's of course not what I want. You can find more information about Create Frontend at aka.ms/createfrontend. So if you like topics like this, that might be a good fit for you as well. So we're heading to the break. I'm going to sign off for a few hours, and I'm going to leave you with Sjoukje and with Mark Duiker, who will join hosting the session.
大家好。
¿Cómo está?
Servus.
Hi.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Gracias.
Hi.
Hoi, ik ben
I'm
Floor.
Ryan Stropek from Austria.
日本からこんにちは。私は不破孝之です。
Ciao, sono Stefano Tempesta, dall'Australia.
Hallo, ik ben Albert Schot uit Nederland.
Hi, I'm Maarten Goed from the Netherlands.
Hi, ¿cómo está? I'm Ruby Jane Cabagna from the Philippines.
Hola, hello.
Hey there.
Hola, soy Sebastián Pérez de Argentina.
您好，
Desde
我是
España.
胡浩，来自中国上海。
Hi, I'm Sarah Lynn from Scotland.
Bonjour, I'm Charlene from France.
Hello, I'm Ruth from France.
Shalom, אני ערן ספילר, מישראל.
from the Netherlands.
Bonjour, I'm Olivier from.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Villiers of Gold Coast, Australia.
For everyone who is upskilling this staycation, we have something very special. The Summer Learner Badger, and you can earn one for joining this event. Scan the QR code, which will appear on your screen, and claim your badger. Azure Heroes is a Microsoft program for recognizing community efforts.
大家好。
Servus.
Hi.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Gracias.
Hi.
Hoi, ik ben
I'm
Floor.
Ryan Stropek from Austria.
日本からこんにちは。私は不破孝之です。
Ciao, sono Stefano Tempesta, dall'Australia.
Hallo, ik ben Albert Schot uit Nederland.
Hi, I'm Maarten Goed from the Netherlands.
Hi, ¿cómo está? I'm Ruby Jane Cabagna from the
Hola,
Philippines.
hello.
Hey there.
Hola, soy Sebastián Pérez de Argentina.
您好，
Desde
我是
España.
胡浩，来自中国上海。
Hi, I'm Sarah Lynn from Scotland.
Bonjour, I'm Charlene from France.
Hello, I'm Ruth from France.
שלום, אני ערן ספילר, מישראל.
from the Netherlands.
Bonjour, I'm Olivier from.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Villiers of Gold Coast, Australia.